Well, I'm delighted today to be with some of my former colleagues from the Internationalisation at Home expert community of the European Association for International Education. I know you're all up for re-election, so fingers crossed that's going to go ahead. Can I just ask you to introduce yourself briefly? We'll begin with Tanja.
Sure. Hi, my name is Tanja Reiffenrath. I work at the University of Göttingen in Germany, where I am a coordinator for internationalization of the curriculum in the Student and Academic Services Department. And at the moment, I'm the chair of the expert community Internationalization at Home at the EAIE.
Thanks. Eva.
Hi, I'm Eva Haug. I work at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, where I am an educational advisor for internationalization of the curriculum and COIL virtual exchange. That's part of the Teaching and Learning Center of the university. I'm also a member of the expert community Internationalization at Home, together with Tanja and Eveke.
Thank you. And Eveke.
Hi, I'm Eveke de Louw from the Hague University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands, where I'm the Senior International Officer, which means I lead a small team called Team Global Citizenship and Internationalization. And I'm also a steering group member of the Internationalization at Home expert community at the EAIE.
Thank you. Well, you've already said quite a few words which people may or may not be familiar with. And we're assuming to some extent that people will understand internationalization at home. We also have internationalization of the curriculum, which is very, very close, and many people use that term instead. But you've also mentioned global citizenship, you've mentioned COIL, virtual exchange, and so on. So I think we could start by just trying to unpack, first of all, the difference between what you've called COIL, which collaborative online international learning, and virtual mobility. So I wonder if we could just try and explore, first of all, what the difference is between the two, and does it matter if there's a difference? Eveke, do you want to start with that?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, to my understanding, I would view virtual mobility as more as online distance learning. Whereas individual students can choose to offer a package of modules or courses online and receive credits through that. Whereas in COIL, I would say these are typically situated within a course, within the module. Students are prepared for and guided throughout the process of a collaborative assignment, where I think the collaborative nature of the assignment is really crucial. You will need to think of a good design of the assignment where you have your students partner with students from another institution abroad to engage in complex problem solving and intercultural learning. So that is how I would frame the difference between virtual mobility and collaborative online international learning.
And just to clarify virtual exchange then, Eva, I'm going to come to you with this one, because I think you said that COIL you see as a modality of virtual exchange.
Yeah, for many, a virtual exchange is like an umbrella concept, and there are different modalities. Sometimes virtual exchange is used in and of itself, and it can have many forms and many different names. We also see this trend that universities are trying to brand whatever they're doing online and internationally. They call it global engagement or global classroom, or there are many different names. Virtual exchange is one that keeps popping up, and we see within virtual exchange different modalities like telecollaboration, which is slightly more focused on language acquisition. Sometimes virtual exchange is also focused, when they use it as a modality, on intercultural dialogue. That can be part of your curriculum or not. Sometimes it's sort of outsourced. There's a different external agency that helps organize it and facilitates those conversations by people who are specially trained for that. COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning, is one of the modalities that is very close to the curriculum, facilitated by the academics themselves.
Yeah, so in summary then, I think virtual mobility, we should see that as effectively distance learning, whereas COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning, is more embedded within a program, but they're both assessed by the home university. They're not just random modules that students can follow like a MOOC program, they're actually assessed by the university. Now, Tanja, I know you were also talking to me previously about BIP programs, which I think are blended intensive programs. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Exactly. So the blended intensive programs, they're a new funding scheme with Erasmus Plus. And the idea with blended intensive programs is that they rely on what the new Erasmus scheme calls blended mobilities. So the students will get together for a virtual period of a flexible duration. It could be preparatory, it could even happen during a physical mobility, or it could happen afterwards. And the students as a group go on a physical mobility that will last between 5 and 30 days. And in order to qualify for funding for the BIP, at least 3 partner universities from the Erasmus program countries need to get together and design a module that the students will receive at least 3 credits for. So that's also an important criterion for the funding.
Mm. So there's a lot of development going on here, and obviously we're 2.5 years into the global pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So how do you feel that these developments have been influenced by the pandemic, or do you feel they were already underway? What's your thinking on this? Eva?
Well, I think they were already on the way, but there's a spotlight that was put on them, sometimes for negative reasons because of the lack of mobility or the inability to travel, and the narrow interpretation of what internationalization could be. So people were looking for what other ways are there, but internationalization of the curriculum at home and virtual exchange, or COIL, were already there for many years. But I think more people started to engage with it. More was known about it. And I think I've seen an improvement in quality of how we do these things, how we engage with it, more professional development because of the increased awareness of other practices.
It's very interesting. And I think Eveke said to me in an email that the quality of the actual engagement seems to have improved as well. So I think you said Eveke, that the added value of in-person exchange over virtual exchange or COIL programs might need to be called into question.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I really noticed, that some of our programs who have mandatory exchange semesters, obviously they were in a complete panic and started also thinking about, okay, so we need to offer an alternative. When can we do that? But it also forced them to rethink about, why do we have mandatory exchanges in the program anyways? Especially when they realize, when setting up a virtual alternative, that actually seemed to work out much better than an in-person exchange for the learning outcomes that they had to actually link to that. They, for example, saw that the quality of student reflections on their learning and their intercultural interactions was of a much higher standard as compared to the reflective assignments that students handed in typically after an in-person exchange. And it's quite interesting to see that some of our very international programs like international business or European studies are actually seriously questioning, whether they should go for a compulsory exchange semester or maybe revert, to the virtual modality, as they can see that they are much better equipped at guiding the students and really nurturing their learning much more so than in an in-person setting. So that's very interesting to see that, something that was really core to those programs are being called into question. And seeing the value that online collaboration can actually really lead to for students and staff.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know we've all talked before about seeing physical mobility as in a way as an added value, as it were, to curriculum developments, which are for all students. But Tanja, have you noticed a similar development in Göttingen? In terms of the quality
In terms of the quality, yeah, in terms of the quality, definitely, because we've also seen that not just a lot more virtual exchange initiatives have been emerging, but they've also been reiterated many more times than initiatives previously. And something that struck me in particular was the fact that we did have a few colleagues who were doing virtual exchange before the pandemic in a way that both classrooms were meeting sort of in person in their classrooms, and they were connected by video conference system. And the academics who have been facilitating virtual exchange in such a way, they've actually said that they cannot imagine to go back into this hybrid modality. They would like to continue to run these courses online because they've come to really appreciate the fact that everyone, every voice, every different perspective has the chance to inhabit the same space in the room. And I think that that's something that really strikes me in terms of the way that we think about these internationalization at home offers. What worries me a little bit in the German context is that at the moment we seem to be really quick to be returning to old habits. And oftentimes I hear an in-person versus online conversations when this shouldn't be about either or, but we should be thinking about bringing the best of both things together. So what can we have online that we cannot have in the classroom? And I'm a little fearful that if we don't pause now and if we don't take a step back and think about what is good teaching and learning in the sense of, for example, including international perspectives in the classroom at home, what this means, how this relates to the mode of delivery, then this could also negatively impact some of the innovations in general, but also in regard to internationalization at home that the crisis of the pandemic has cultivated in the past years.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, isn't it? An interesting point about the degree to which it will become embedded or just be abandoned as things start to open up again. But it sounds as though, from the way you've all been talking, it sounds as though things have moved on a little bit from perhaps the early phases, as it were, of internationalization at home, where people are thinking about kind of activity-based things that they could get students to do and take part in. But it sounds as though people are thinking much more about the broader curriculum, the way you're describing things, and thinking about learning outcomes and outcomes for students. Have I got the wrong impression there, or do you feel that that's actually happening?
It's a tad optimistic, but I think we're seeing more evidence of that. Yes, but it is a conversation that continuously needs to be fostered and engaged with.
Eveke, you're looking a little bit.
Yeah. Maybe even less optimistic. On the one hand, you've seen that so many more lecturers have become engaged because they've seen how easy it is to invite the world into your classroom, and so it has whet the appetite. And we're also speaking to the non-usual suspects, so that's incredibly nice. Do
you mean the usual suspects within your university?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So programs that were very hard to engage with, and all of a sudden, but so-and-so, has invited a guest lecturer online into their classroom and now wants to talk about how can I apply for this grant that the Dutch government has made available to boost online projects with students. But having said that, it's very often still an activity within a course, and people are not really questioning, okay, so how do we firmly anchor that into the learning outcomes of the module? It's still a loose activity, it's nice to do, but is it really assessed then accordingly? And it does provide us with an entry point. You have a conversation that you can follow up on and say, okay, but now that you have this one COIL project, how do you build on that? How did you prepare your students? What are the implications for the wider curriculum? But it's still a discussion that very much we have to initiate from our team. It's not something that happens by itself.
No, but it's still quite positive that you're having the discussions in a way, isn't it? I mean, I think it sounds to me as though things have moved on. But another point, though, you said about including people from different programs that wouldn't have been involved before. And I remember, Eva, when we had a previous conversation 2 years ago in this series, and you talked about being involved with programs in Latin America and South Africa, and in the sense that we're perhaps engaging people from different parts of the world who might not have taken part so much in physical mobility. Can you say something about that?
Absolutely. Well, one of the places that we're seeing this diversity in voices and perspectives and experiences is also in international conferences. Some of the conferences all of the conferences have gone online and have offered an online version of what they used to do. And now there's a discussion whether to continue that hybrid or to really go back to in person. One of the interesting things I noticed, for example, the International Virtual Exchange Conference, IVEC, that all of a sudden you had many more participants from South Africa, from Africa actually, and from South America that could normally not travel to be at these conferences, but they were there sharing their experiences. And we're also seeing it in the projects that we develop, yes, COIL projects, but that we try to develop purposefully with the Global South to bring in these different perspectives, because there's not a formal need for a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, or a formal agreement between universities. We can work with universities that we would normally not think of, but where the students from that particular place in the world can contribute a lot to our learning and widening our perspectives, or our students' perspectives. So I think that's of great value, and it's an encouraging trend that we're seeing.
Definitely, yeah. And yeah, conference participation, I think, has really changed during this time, hasn't it? But I think it's also worth thinking about whether, Tanja, I'm going to ask you this question. Do you think, is it now also linking more with wider institutional agendas? So, for example, around sustainability or around decolonisation of the curriculum, which is certainly a big topic in many countries. And I wonder whether you see it as the internationalisation of the curriculum at home, or is becoming more part of an institutional discussion.
Yeah, there is definitely a lot of potential to link it to other ongoing discourses. It's definitely sustainability, the sustainable development goals, but it's also discourses of diversity, inclusion, the potential to address inequities in the curriculum, decolonisation, which I sometimes fear is too tricky a topic to put it on the institutional agenda here in Europe. But internationalization of the curriculum definitely has so many cross linkages to these other institutional agendas. So this is, I think, also a moment in time where we should team up with colleagues who are working to put these agendas into action, in order to, not compete with each other, but to really sort of reinforce the same goals that we essentially have.
So you said it has the potential. Does that mean you feel it's not really happening at the moment?
With sustainability, I feel it's definitely an emerging conversation, because that's in the context of sort of green mobility, where also virtual exchange comes in as a way to have international experiences without increasing one's carbon footprint. For example, the sustainability goals obviously lend themselves to a teamwork within a COIL exchange, for example. With inclusion and diversity, I think the higher education institutions in the Netherlands are linking very much internationalization at home, if I understand Eveke and Eva correctly from other contexts. I still have the feeling it's a bit of an emerging conversation, and we probably need to put this on institutional agendas a little bit more to make this linkage really clear.
So do you think it's happening more in the Netherlands, Eveke?
Yeah, I do see that in The Hague, and also when talking to Eva, I know that Amsterdam is really trying to align all of these different elements as well. I can see it very much happening bottom up. We initiated a number of teaching and learning labs in The Hague, and you can see that there are very natural connections between, for example, internationalization. My colleagues working with diversity and inclusion, people with blended learning specialists, but also language experts. And you can see there's so much overlap and there's so much synergy to be had. So us joining forces has been incredibly valuable. What we do miss is then the next step indeed is how do we connect that to institutional policies? Yeah. So that's still a bit of a tricky mechanism, but I think it's really positive that, from bottom up, we are starting to seek that kind of alignment and collaboration so that it becomes also clearer to our lecturers, like how do these all interrelate? Because that's often not clear. Very often, you speak to academics and they say, okay, but I'm interested in diversity, but I have nothing with internationalization, for example. And it's getting that kind of consistent narrative across where we need the collaboration between all of the supporting teams that work with our academics, and seeing that happening is super exciting and very enriching for our own practice again as well, to look at, so why do we frame this as internationalization? What can I learn from my blended learning colleagues, etc. So it really
I guess the problem is that when you're enthusiastic, as we all are, you always want things to go much more quickly, don't you? But I'm very encouraged by the kind of conversation that we're having here, and compared to, when I was involved in a bit more depth, 4 or 5 years ago, I feel as though things have moved on the way you're talking about them. But Eva, what do you think are the most exciting new developments that you're seeing in internationalization of the curriculum at home, or anything? Where do you see the exciting developments now?
Well, to me, exciting developments are the more inclusive character, or at least the question marks that we're putting on how inclusive is internationalization, and what do we mean by that? So interesting what Eveke said about bottom up. Actually, for us, in Amsterdam, it's more of a top down, or an institutional vision and goals, which are sustainability, digitalization, and diversity and inclusion. And then academics, bottom up, come up with questions like, but how do I connect my curriculum to these goals? And internationalization is sometimes the bridge between these, to bring in different perspectives, to practice interdisciplinarity. And so to me, what is interesting about a more inclusive approach, to comprehensive but mostly inclusive approach, it makes us question, who do we work with, who are our partners, and are their experiences represented? And one of the to me then interesting aspects about COIL and the professional development that we like to provide for COIL is that if you want the students to collaborate, it needs to be on equal ground. So when we work with partners who are in another part of the world, the experience of that collaboration needs to represent both of the students' realities. So by developing a COIL project, it makes academics think about what are my usual practices, and what are sort of the dominant narratives in how I teach or how I engage with my curriculum, and could there be other ways in? So it's sort of a sneaky way to make them think, look at the larger picture and look at it critically, because Tanja said that it's not always a safe space where we talk about what is our role in decolonizing or making internationalization more inclusive. But we're growing more comfortable in this space, I feel.
Interesting. So Tanja, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that. We're still talking about the most exciting new developments. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, decolonization of the curriculum is definitely something that's close to my heart, and it's really great for me to see this discourse also gain traction in Europe. And I think what I would love to see in the future is also see us develop a really European perspective on what decolonization of the curriculum should mean here. In our role as the former colonizers, it needs to mean something different here than it does in South Africa, for example. It needs to mean something different than us using US American theories on decolonization and post-colonial studies. So the question for me would be, how can we as curriculum developers facilitate such conversations amongst academics? How can we also inspire them to dwell on what they teach in their discipline, what the canon in their discipline is, what they read, what they don't read, what they make available to the students, and how students can learn about the reception of such canonic authors. So all these, I feel these are immensely tricky questions, and in and of ourselves, we cannot answer them alone. We'll need our international network of partners and colleagues in order to do this.
Yeah. Well, and there was an interesting video recording that I made with Sharon Stein, and about decolonisation from a Canadian perspective, or from a very different perspective from a European one. So hopefully people will have a chance to look at that as well. I wanted to just to finish off really towards the end with thinking about what the challenges are now. You're all very embedded in the whole thing. You're very interested and dynamic and doing fantastic things. So I think one of the worries is that people imagine they might listen to you and think, oh my goodness, we've got so far to go. So we should point out that you are at the forefront of many of these developments. But having said that, there are still challenges even where it's working well. So Eveke, I wonder if I could begin with you, asking if you see any challenges. What sort of critiques do you feel there are of internationalisation of the curriculum at home?
Yeah, I do think that even though, the pandemic has brought internationalization at home and internationalization of the curriculum into the center of discussion, simply for the very fact that mobility was not possible. So it was really taken as an alternative, and everyone started saying, oh, then we should do internationalization at home, without really realizing what are we talking about. And I still feel like a lot of people say we're doing internationalization at home, but don't progress beyond the stage of we'll do a few activities and that's it. And so, we've been saying for a long time, it should be anchored in the programs, in the curriculum, and should be embedded in learning outcomes. And for me, we're not progressing fast enough in that. So what is holding academics back and academic programs back from really, articulating very clearly, this is the international or intercultural global dimension that I'm preparing my students for. And this is how I'm going to assess. So maybe we should become more self-critical in that as well. It's like, okay, so why are we not successful in that? What is it we're competing against? So I like, a more critical look at what is the message that we're, disseminating, and maybe is that the right message, or should we be, focusing far more on, as Tanja said, sustainability, and that really triggers a kind of a response where there's more a sense of urgency, and that processes like internationalization at home and internationalization of the curriculum can play a role in achieving some of those goals.
Yeah, great. Okay, so that's a very clear challenge in terms of curriculum development. Yeah, Tanja, would you like to add anything to that? What do you see as the challenges?
Yeah, building on to what Eveke has been saying, what I've seen in the past months is that with the blended intensive programs, but also with some of our virtual exchanges, it really makes me wonder, are we still in line with our big goal of internationalization at home to reach all of the students? Because what we've seen in some of the programs that have been running in this way is that we're not reaching the non-mobile students, but we're reaching the students who are super excited about international experiences anyway. And I think this is something that would really require discussion, and we should really think about how we, not just how we recruit the students, but how we make students aware of these kinds of offers, because even if they're integrated neatly into the curriculum as sort of different choices that students can make, they tend to attract not necessarily the students that we have intended as the target group.
That's a very interesting point. Yeah. Eva, anything to add on challenges?
Well, yeah, I'm surprised by what Tanja say. For us, virtual exchange or COIL is part of the mandatory program in some of the in some faculties. So it's not a choice, and I'm happy about that. Listening to you, I started to take it for granted, and now I'm more appreciative of the effort we put into that. But I completely agree also with Eveke. There's still a lot to be done to look at horizontally and vertically how internationalization at home or internationalization of the curriculum is embedded, and how it strengthens. I think also this conversation on how do we demonstrate its worth or the value, and how does it improve the quality of education. That's still something that I'm trying to, when asked the question, I'm still trying to find what is a good answer, convincing answer. I also believe very strongly that we need to invest in professional development, capacity building for these. So it should be part of maybe the teacher training program, or for the programs for academics when they join universities, because often it's not, and it's seen as something that you automatically should be able to do, whereas that's not the case. Yeah. And academics have had to pivot a lot over the past 2 years. Yeah. You don't want to add yet another thing, but a poorly developed COIL or a poorly facilitated COIL project is worse than not doing anything at all sometimes. Yeah. So.
But on the other hand, we also want to make sure that any progress that's been made, albeit because we've had to, that we don't want to just suddenly drop everything and go back to the old ways of doing things. So let's hope that some of these initiatives are going to take root and will continue to move forward. But well, thank you so much for certainly enlightening me on recent developments and looking at the challenges as well. And thank you for taking the time to talk today. And it's lovely to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elspeth.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.